What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today we're going to look at the top 10 cards of 2017. A little bit of clarification here. We're talking specifically today about cards that came out in the year 2017. So starting with Aether Revolt, essentially, was released on January 20th, 2017. Everything on from that is fair game for the list. So even though cards like Attune with Aether and Death's Shadow had really good years, they didn't come out this year, so they won't show up on the list. But I should at least say that those cards had good years. But anyway, let's go ahead and start things. Now, I really didn't want to have to do this to kick the list off, but if we're being honest with ourselves, it's got to be on here somewhere, so it might as well be number 10, Felidar Guardian. Say what you will about Felidar Guardian, that's kind of the entire point, is you will say stuff about it. This is easily one of the most talked about cards of the entire year, and it had huge ramifications on the way the Wizards designed cards. They hired a whole other part to the R&D department that included pros and stuff, so just so this kind of thing won't happen again, it's probably going to go down as one of the biggest mistakes in design of all time, even 5, 10, 20 years from now, if the game persists, this will always be an interesting little footnote, a thing that happened, like Necro Summer or Combo Winter, for 3 months, we had a deck in Standard where people were winning with an infinite, almost unstoppable combo on turn 4, and the deck sort of lives on in Standard to this day. You can't play Felidar Guardian, sure, but the shell that was built around it went on to essentially become Teamer Energy, which is the de facto best deck in the format for months now. So in a way, the cat's still there in spirit. There's just so much about this card that impacted not just Standard, but multiple formats and probably the history of the game, in a way, because we'll always look back on this as one of the bigger design flaws that's ever occurred and been allowed to happen. So moral of the story, you got to give the devil its due sometimes, and Cat Combo definitely deserves some mention if we're talking about 2017, because the year was front-loaded with concerns about this dumb combo that took way too long to stop before it was all said and done. So with all that in mind, Cat Combo definitely deserves to be discussed at least one more time before we close the door on it. In at number 9, this is the only time I'm going to cheat and double up on cards this entire list, but indulge me here. Number 9 is Heart of Kiran and Aethersphere Harvester. Now, these are both pretty different cards, obviously, but I think they both represent the pinnacle of what vehicles can be in Standard, and they're pretty balanced, too, which is awesome. These are the best vehicles we've seen printed, other than Smuggler's Copter, which went a little overboard, but after Smuggler's Copter got banned, a lot of stuff got banned this year, but after Copter got banned, these two, especially Heart of Kiran, really took up the mantle in the Mardu Vehicles deck, which still persists. They're on, version 2.2, or really probably 3.1 of Mardu Vehicles right now, and it's still a decent deck in the format, and a lot of that is Heart of Kiran, which does see play in other decks, the mono black aggro deck, which is a pretty good deck right now too, and has been for a couple of months, has Heart of Kiran as a key 2-drop in that deck, and Aethersphere Harvester also shows up in these Mardu Vehicles list, but it's a great sideboard card against Ramanap Red, which is one of the premier decks in the format for 6 months or more at this point. So both of these cards are different, but you'll see them in the same decks occasionally. I just feel like they both, again, represent how good vehicles can be, especially when balanced properly. And they've both shown up in a bunch of different lists this year, and occasionally, again, together. So I think they deserve a spot somewhere. These are vehicles done right. My number 8 is God Pharaoh's Gift. This showed up in the finals of Pro Tour Ixalan, so probably deserves a nod just for that, but a lot of people have been doing a lot of stuff with this card all year. At first there was the blue-red God Pharaoh's Gift deck that used Insolent Neonate as a 1-drop. That ended up rotating, so the deck became essentially a blue-white God Pharaoh's Gift deck that got Angel of Invention out of its graveyard, and that's the one that we saw at PT Ixalan. It's been a dominant force so far in this Standard. It's basically the top of the B tier or the bottom of the A tier, and it has been for a while through different iterations. And we see the Esper God Pharaoh's Gift deck that's still a contender on MTGO, and it plays a whole different strategy. It uses Gate to the Afterlife, but a lot of these other decks will use Refurbish. There's been multiple strategies abusing God Pharaoh's Gift since the card first came out, and it's been a while at this point since the card came out. We've had over half a year with the dumb thing, and a lot of people have thrown a lot of stuff at the wall, and a surprising amount of that stuff has stuck. My number 7 is Winding Constrictor. See what I did there? AKA the snake, or the snack. That's what everyone calls it. It's getting old at this point, but it feels like Winding Constrictor has been around for longer than it actually has been, because there's a lot of history with this card in Standard already, you know, from black-green Delirium to green-black mid-range decks with like Verdurous Gearhulk and Rishkar and stuff, you know, the Snake deck, all the way up to the finals of Pro Tour Ixalan. Sultai Energy, it's an amazing piece in that, and Seth Manfield got it turned too, like, every game in that match, it felt like. So just like a really important card in multiple standard decks. But it never really broke through into play in other formats. You see it in Modern occasionally, but I mean very occasionally. So it's never really broke through into seeing play in other formats. So it's all the way up here at NumberSeven. But just the impact it had on Standard is kind of huge, and it's one of the most talked about cards this year too. So I feel like it deserves a list somewhere. My number 6 is Walking Ballista, one of the cards that the Snake enables. You know, there's a few cards that are already decent, like Long Tusk Cub and Walking Ballista, that just get better with the Snake. So I wanted to put these cards close to one another on the list, but Walking Ballista is definitely the much, much better card that's had way more impact on more formats for that matter. This not only sees the obvious play in Standard, where it's been in every green-black Snake deck ever, but also Mardu Vehicles version 2, you know, when the deck got a little bit more mid-range. Walking Ballista was a huge part of that deck. It's just been a mainstay in Standard for the most part. This is another card that sort of fades in and out, but it's always an important card, or card that you have to consider when building decks and, you know, when figuring out how you're going to approach the meta. Walking Ballista has always been an important card, but it also sees some play in Modern and even play in Legacy and Vintage and stuff. And it's a big card in Commander, where people are just making all the mana in the world, you know. Just this card has seen play in literally everything, you know. It's a big card in Tron, which is in itself a big deck in other formats. So just like Walking Ballista has seen play pretty much everywhere. It's got a lot of postcards and stickers on its suitcase at this point. Walking Ballista has been around, so it definitely deserves to be on the list somewhere, and I put it towards the middle here, because I definitely think there have been cards with a little bit more impact, especially in multiple formats, and cards with more impact in Standard at large. But as far as versatility and the ability to travel well, Walking Ballista is maybe one of the best cards of the entire year. Easy. Now, we've hit the middle of the list. We're at number 5, and you may have been searching for a card from Ixalan. And admittedly, there's not a whole lot of cards from Ixalan on the list, but if I was going to choose just one to make the list proper, it'd probably be Search for Azcanta. Now, don't worry, in my honorable mentions, which there's going to be quite a few honorable mentions, I'll get to those right before I get to number 1. There's a bunch of Ixalan cards in there. I felt like there were a bunch of contenders for number 10. Out of Ixalan, but as far as like pure power, maybe best card at the end of the day in Ixalan, it's got to be Search for Azcanta. Not only has this had maximum impact in Standard, this almost single-handedly made Control a thing again. It's great in the approach decks, amazing in blue-black Control as well, and it even makes Grixis Control really competitive too. But it's also seeing play in Modern. It's obviously great in Commander, and Legacy players are even dipping into trying to play this card at this point. This is another one that's just seen all the play in the world and allows you to just bury your opponents in card advantage. It's just unfair, you know, and it fuels things like Delver, it fuels things like Delve, for that matter, fuels stuff, just any graveyard strategy in Modern, this helps fuel. It's just got a million different uses, and once you do flip it, that's sort of ramp, and you get an impulse pretty much every turn, which is unfreaking believable in Control or even combo decks where you're digging for specific pieces. There's just way too many applications for this card that I can't even finish the sentence without losing my breath. In case you didn't notice, there's just a million things you can do with Search for Azcanta, and honestly, I kind of feel like we haven't even dug very deep as far as what this card can do and the shells that it goes into. My number 4 is Rogue Refiner, and the only reason it's Rogue Refiner is because like Attune with Ether and Ether Hub and Long Tusk Cub all came out in Kaladesh. You know, if there's one card from 2017 that's representative of Energy, it's Rogue Refiner, and that's why this card was actually number 2 on this list for a really, really long time. But Energy hasn't seen a whole lot of play outside of Standard. But that being said, Energy has seen all of the play in Standard, has dominated Standard. It's the de facto best deck, no matter if you're playing Teamer or 4-color Energy or Sultai Energy. All of them are insane picks. Teamer Energy won Worlds, Sultai Energy won, you know, Pro Tour Ixalan. It's just, and there have been MTGO results that I've seen just recently. I think it was one of them was the Mox Championship, Magic Online Championship Series, where literally like every deck in the top 8 is Teamer Energy or four color energy, except for maybe your random like Ramanap Red list. So like Rogue Refiner is symbolic of maybe the most dominant standard strategy we've seen in years at this point. At this point, you're either playing Ramanap Red, you're playing Energy, or you're trying to beat those two strategies, and not a whole lot does. So Rogue Refiner has to be on the list somewhere. Again, it's just symbolic of the most dominant standard strategy in a really, really long time. Speaking of, by the way, the next two cards will also fit that bill. Number 3, we're in the top 3. Number 3 is Hazaret the Fervent, definitely. And I think that this is a lot more symbolic of its given strategy than a card like Rogue Refiner is, you know. Hazaret is the one card that you have got to stop if you're going to beat Ramanap Red, and whole decks have been warped around trying to stop this card, you know. People play Cast Out, Ixalan's Binding, Settle the Wreckage, Vraska's Contempt. There are quite a few ways in Standard to take this thing out, but rest assured, whether it's in the main deck or in the sideboard somewhere, you have got to account for the fact that Hazaret exists. So, just that being said, I think that she deserves a spot somewhere, but the reason she's so high up is because Ramanap Red is the other extremely oppressive deck in this format right now. And honestly, Hazaret, she just gives the deck all the reach and all the, you know, power that it needs to finish out a game. Even if Hazaret isn't swinging, she's hitting for at least 2 a turn, sometimes very often more than just that. Just reach, power, surprise power, haste, top deck ability, just everything about Hazaret is insane. It made an entire archetype what it is, and whether or not you hate Ramanap Red or you love Ramanap Red, you can't deny that Hazaret is the critical piece in that deck, but it kind of couldn't function anywhere near as well without. Here we are at number 2 already, you guys. My number 2 is the Scarab God, and again, this was a really hard decision. Hazaret or the Scarab God, but I think that Scarab God, even though it too, just like Hazaret, and just like, you know, the energy cards, it hasn't seen a lot of play in formats like Modern or, God forbid, Vintage or Legacy, but it has really helped define Standard almost more than any other card in the past few months. And this is another card, just like Hazaret, that we were all a little bit cold on for the first couple of months, but then it turns out once people start recognizing how powerful the card actually is, it's easily one of the best cards in Standard, and if I'm not mistaken, the most expensive card in all of Standard right now. And there's a reason for that, you know, whether it's blue-black control or really any blue-black control deck, whether it's Esper or Grixis or just plain old blue-black, or blue-black mid-range for that matter, that's a deck in the format too, or, of course, 4-color energy. This card is all over the format right now. It's even in the Grixis Thopters deck that's tearing up Magic Online. It just has a spot everywhere. Whole decks exist because you can slot in 1 or 2 Scarab Gods and just kind of go from there. That's how powerful the card is. It makes even horrible janky decks incredible. Now before we hit number 1, I've got a bunch of honorable mentions. This was a really powerful year for Magic cards, you guys. You know, their Wizards made some slip-ups this year, and there were some problems here and there in some decisions. You know, MTG Arena could have gotten off to a better start. There were problems this year, yes, but as far as the actual card design, it was either too powerful or just right. I feel like a lot of cards really hit the pocket this year, and even though they weren't like the most played cards ever, they were still really impactful cards for what it's worth. So I've got a lot of honorable mentions to kind of barrel through here, so bear with me. Here we go. We're going to start with Baral, Chief of Compliance. This was almost number 10 and probably does deserve a spot somewhere on the list, to be honest with you. This was banned in 1v1 Commander. It was so good. It got banned in a format, you guys. It's probably good enough to be on the list. And not only that, but Modern Storm is probably one of the best decks in the entire Modern format right now, and a lot of that is because it can play Baral. Other cards include Glorybringer, which was almost my number 10. This is another one of those cards that's just good. It's just, you look at it, and any player of any skill level can tell that it's very good, and it showed up in a butt ton of different stuff this year, from mono-red mid-range and aggro decks to Teamer Energy and stuff. It's just been in everything, you know. Marty Vehicles will sometimes bring it in out of the sideboard. There are a lot of different decks that play Glorybringer, and it's not hard to figure out why. It's just a purely good Magic card on its face. Another good one is Metallic Mimic. This was close to number 10. A lot of these were. This one is more on the casual side of things. A lot of casual players just love Metallic Mimic. Easy to see why, but the card has been great in Commander, in all the tribal synergies in Commander. It's been fine for budget decks in Standard and stuff, and even some competitive decks in Standard. You know, Vampire Monument plays Metallic Mimic to really good results. So I love Metallic Mimic. It's one of my favorite cards in the past year. It at least deserves to be mentioned. Another one is Censor. Insanely good counterspell that really helped make Control a real deck in this format, and it's still a real deck in this format for what it's worth, and Censor is still a big part of that. Whether you're cycling it away, it's never a bad top deck, or you're using it to counter creatures on the play on turn 2 and 3, Censor is always great. If there were just a couple of worse cards this year, Anointed Procession would have definitely made the list. This, more than almost any card that I'll talk about today, I think is poised for a great 2018. Depending on what we see, Anointed Procession could be a breakout card in the upcoming Standard. Never count it out. It can already do some crazy stuff. And with Ascend, the Ascend mechanic on the horizon, I definitely think Anointed Procession is poised to do a lot of work. So be on the lookout for this in 2018, but it's already had a decent 2017 too. Another one is Gifted Aetherborn. This has been great in mono black aggro decks and even other aggro decks, you know, that aren't just mono black, but it's also come in out of the sideboard for mid-range and control decks to help combat Ramunap Red. A lot of play in Gifted Aetherborn this year. Another card that just barely missed the list is Glint Sleeve Siphoner. This is another one of the better energy cards, and this one showed up in the, the winning Pro Tour Ixalan deck too. It was in Sultai Energy and ended up drawing a bunch of cards over the course of that match. Glint Sleeve Siphoner is an awesome card advantage engine, and it's a decently costed creature for what it's worth at the end of the day, with an evasive ability too. There's just a lot to like about Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and it flexed its muscles a few times this year. This is a good Magic card. There were also a bunch of cards from Ixalan that barely didn't make the list, like I was saying earlier. First of all, Field of Ruin, probably almost good enough, but just not quite. But still deserves a mention. Field of Ruin is a great card in Standard, mostly for taking out all these transform lands, but this card will occasionally see play in other formats aside from just Standard, which is definitely worth noting. Same thing with Kitesail Freebooter. Kitesail Freebooter has seen a lot of sideboard play in Standard, but along with Unclaimed Territory, it has really made the humans archetype a real thing again in Modern. There's a bunch of different ways to build humans, and Kitesail Freebooter really helped refresh that archetype, and I love that we see this card in Modern. That's insane. We don't see a whole lot in Standard, but just the fact that we see it played relatively frequently in Modern means that it should probably be at least talked about in a list of best cards from this year. Same thing with Opt. This hasn't seen all the Standard play in the world, but it also, just like Baral, sees some play in Modern Storm, and I think that if you see play in one of the best decks in Modern, I should at least bring you up in a list of the best cards from the year. Same thing with Hostage Taker. This too showed up in the winning Pro Tour Ixalan deck. Sultai Energy played a few copies of this, and it's proven itself to, outside of Search for Azcanta, maybe be the best card from Ixalan. And I think it just barely doesn't make the list, but only because there's a bunch of cards this year that were just extremely powerful and impactful. Hostage Taker doesn't quite make the list, but I will say this is definitely one of the better cards in all of Ixalan. And finally, if there's one card that didn't make my list that most deserves to, it's got to be a Braid, right? I mean, I just couldn't find room for it. There were a lot of cards on the list that either saw multi-format play or that whole decks that were super dominant were built around. So, at the end of the day, I just couldn't find room for a Braid. But if this were a top 11, it would definitely make the cut. But as far as number one, I really don't think that it's even close. This card had more impact on more formats than any card released this year by an awfully wide margin, and you've probably already guessed what it is. Ladies and gentlemen, the Black Bolt, Fatal Push. Now, Fatal Push has been instrumental in keeping aggro relatively in check in Standard, and not only aggro, it can also kill stuff like Long Tusk Cub, so it helps keep energy in check. This allows us, essentially, to play black in Standard. But aside from Standard, this sees a ton of Modern play, and will forever. And it even sees play in Vintage and Legacy. Not so much in Commander, for the most part, but it sees play in literally every competitive format, and a lot of play at that. And not only that, I think it deserves to be number one because more than any card on the entire list, and you could argue Walking Ballista, even Search for Escanta, and a couple of other cards, but I definitely think more than any card on the entire list, it's going to end up having the most long-term impact on the entire game. And honestly, I don't think we've seen a card anywhere near this power level since maybe Monastery Swiftspear. And those aren't even comparable cards, but we're talking about pure power level of a card. That's probably a decent comparison as far as the last time we saw a card this crazy. Other than that, like as far as removal, the last time we saw a removal piece this efficient, I was going to say Hero's Downfall, but this is way better than Downfall. Way better than Downfall. I'd probably say Abrupt Decay probably is the last time we saw a card anywhere even close to this. That, as far as a removal spell, just this will always be played for the rest of the entire history of Magic in Modern and Legacy and Vintage. This will go on to be an extremely important card for as long as we play this game. So, that being said, I have no qualm saying it is definitely the best card released in 2017, and maybe the best card released in the last couple of years. But that's all I got for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this list. If I left anything off of it, make sure you hit me in the comments section. Let me know what I screwed up. I'm always interested in that. There's always something. There's always something. And hopefully it's not anything too big. Hopefully I covered it all in the honorable mentions. But there's always something. So let me know down there in the comments section. And also, if you enjoyed the video, or even if you didn't enjoy the video, I really hope you'll like it because that makes me feel good as a person. So, like the video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell for the notifications because Rivals of Ixalan spoilers are literally just a couple of days away. They're set to start on January 1st officially, but I wouldn't be surprised if Wizards just kind of let a couple of cards fall off the truck before then. So, subscribe if you're new, make sure you hit the bell for notifications. You'll want those spoiler vids, and you'll want all the deck techs when Rivals actually does come out. So, do all that stuff. You can follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev to know when decks are coming out, or for occasional witticisms and such. Been pretty sharp lately, I think, so do that. You can also throw me $1 on Patreon if you really feel like it at patreon.com/SBMTG, and I'll let you know what decks we're doing the day before we do them. You can pay me more and I'll do more stuff for you. Go check it out. And by the way, if you wanted to order any of these cards that you saw on this list, because a lot of them will have significance even after they rotate, and a lot of them don't rotate for quite some time, but if you wanted to go ahead and order them, you can check out the first link in the description. That'll take you over to TCG Player, where you can get any of these cards for the lowest price on the entire internet. Like right now, it's probably a good time to go ahead and pick up Fatal Push. Don't tell anybody. I know there's probably a bunch of people watching the video, but don't tell anybody. Fatal Push is sort of at a low right now. It's like $625, $650 last time I checked. That's a steal, and after the card rotates out of Standard, you can bet that it'll eventually shoot up because people are still going to be playing it in Modern, and it's only really seen the one printing and an F&M promo. So, it hasn't seen that much printing, so the card is going to be an important card in Magic history for as long as we play this game. Might as well pick up your copies now while it's relatively quiet. So, in any case, long story short, click the first link in the description. That'll take you over there, and you can make your own financial decisions because you're a grown-up. But I'm pretty sure that I'm tapped out after all that. So I guess I'll catch you cats later. I've been Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. And most importantly, spread love. Be kind.